1 hour Auckland to Wellington, Wellington to Auckland, up against 12 hours.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a hard call. Maybe a little bit better in today's market, where we're a bit more conscious of what we're spending and how we're travelling. It's a neat way to travel, but you do need to have a bit of time.
Good on you, Jeff. Thanks for the memories.
Tell you what, Retail NZ would hate it.
Well, come on, get off that, David Cormack. And speaking of David Cormack and Julia Hartley-Moore, here's one for you. Not my words. Jeff says, Wallace, your music taste is just too sophisticated for your guests. Look, Jeff.
Oh, please. Sorry. Go on. Really?
I'm not saying that.
You're writing these yourself. I'm
not writing these myself, David, or Julia. It's just what they're saying to me. Yeah. Anyway, that's us. Have a great Thursday evening, both of you. That's Julia Hartley-Moore, David Cormack. I'm Wallace Chapman, and I'll see you tomorrow for Power Ballot Friday afternoon. I'm there 3:45. Stay with RNZ for Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Bye.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, a government cyclone support package that offers more debt to growers and farmers, albeit at cut price interest rates. The Emergency Management Minister joins us. Meanwhile, in another episode of Ministers Under the Microscope, Kiri Allan fiercely denies treating any staff badly, and Jan Tinetti delivers a mini mea culpa. Ratepayers behaving badly, we reveal a wave of abuse, intimidation and assault against some council staff. Kiwis donated more than $26 million to the Red Cross Cyclone Fund. So where has it all gone? And we sense the Census could come tantalisingly close to its 90% response target. We'll have the details. You can watch us live on Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, good afternoon. I'm Karen McCarthy. Cyclone hit Hawke's Bay growers say the government has taken far too long to come up with a scheme to help them get back on their feet. They can now get concessionary loans and equity finance of up to $4 million per business from a pool of up to $240 million. Apples and Pears Chair Richard Punter says while there's relief, frustration lingers.
Waiting for months to find out what's going to happen puts you well behind the 8 ball when you're trying to do something in the orchard. If you mix all those things up and the mental stress of having maybe lost your home and all your possessions as well as your orchard and still being confronted by mountains of silt and trees, it's a bit of an uphill battle to convince the growers right now that this is a good thing.
Businesses can expect banks to start giving loans by the end of July. The Education Minister has apologised to Parliament for misleading it by taking too long to correct an inaccurate statement in the House. Parliament's Privileges Committee has found Jan Tinetti made a serious error of judgment. Here's political reporter Katie Scotcher.
The powerful committee of senior MPs was tasked with deciding whether Ms Tinetti's 2-month delay in correcting her statement about attendance data amounted to contempt. It has found she made and sustained an erroneous judgment that caused Parliament to be misled. But it says this reflected a high degree of negligence on her part rather than any ill intention, and it has not found her guilty of contempt. Ms Tinetti says she accepts the committee's finding.
Justice Minister Kiri Allan has challenged the opposition to put up or shut up over claims of staff mistreatment. 2 public service bosses have acknowledged being aware of concerns about working relationships in Ms Allan's office more than a year ago. She has flatly denied treating staff poorly and to a select committee meeting today challenged national MPs to substantiate their claims.
This isn't a blood sport for most of us. You have OI age, everything under the sun, and you have still yet to turn anything up.
The New South Wales corruption watchdog, the ICAC, has found former state premier Gladys Berejiklian engaged in serious corrupt conduct. The ABC's Isabel Rowe reports.
The ICAC's investigation has made findings of corrupt conduct against two people, Ms Berejiklian and Wagga Wagga MP Daryl Maguire. It found the former Premier had a conflict of interest by maintaining a secret relationship with Mr Maguire while awarding grants to his electorate. It also found Mr Maguire engaged in corrupt conduct by using his position as an MP to run a cash-for visa business. Liberal leader Mark Speakman says the ICAC has not recommended criminal charges against Ms Berejiklian and maintains she was a strong leader during the pandemic.
Gladys Berejiklian resigned as Premier 2 years ago. Wellington's mayor says she's not surprised by a council vote against withdrawing from the Let's Get Wellington Moving program, but says she will call for changes to it. This afternoon's vote was tight, with 9 councillors in favour of carrying on with the controversial project and 7 against. Tori Whānau says she'll take on board what she's heard.
I am actually deeply appreciative of the councillors for bringing it forward because it has raised some issues with the program that we do need to address. Things like engaging with businesses far better. Maybe our governance structure does need to be reviewed. So I'll be putting up a couple of amendments today as a result of their feedback.
Primary school principals who belong to the Educational Institute have settled their pay dispute and voted to accept the most recent Education Ministry offer. The deal includes pay rises of 6% next month, 3% in the middle of next year and 1.8% at the end of next year. It also boosts the base pay rates of principals of the smallest schools from around $98,000 to $118,000 at the end of next year. Now only secondary and area school teachers' pay disputes remain unresolved. To sport now, and prop Kate Henwood will complete a meteoric rugby rise tonight when the Black Ferns play their first test of the year against Australia in Brisbane. The 34-year-old has gone from being initially unwanted for Super Rugby Aupiki to be called up as injury cover for the Chiefs Manawa and then picked for her debut with the Black Ferns.
The team naming was pretty surreal when they read out the names being the first, number one. I don't think I kind of came back round to hear the rest of the team for a bit. I kind of went a bit deaf and blind at the time.
The match kicks off at 9 o'clock. Former international surfer Maz Quinn is in intensive care after being airlifted to hospital following a serious surfing accident in Mahia yesterday. Quinn said on social media a wave picked him up and drove him into a rocky sea ledge. He was washed up on the beach and had to crawl for 20 minutes before being found. He suffered 4 broken ribs and back injuries, but is adamant he will return to the water. Australia will resume tonight on 339 for 5 on day 2 of the second Ashes test against England at Lord's. Steve Smith is on 85. 4 times Olympic gold medalist Simone Biles will return to competitive gymnastics in August in her first event since the Tokyo Games in 2021. And the Football Manager video game series will introduce women's teams and players for the first time next year. That's the news.
A high-profile sexual offender is unmasked.
The silence has been its own kind of violence. It's been very well known that this has been James Wallace for many years now.
Will the capital's makeover go ahead?
If we do stop Let's Get Wellington moving, there's no doubt that our city is going to die and stagnate.
And curiosity kills the cat and cuts power to tens of thousands.
Unfortunately, it's not alive. It sort of received a pretty significant electric shock.
Your daily news morning report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National. Lisa Owens here with Checkpoint after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight on Friday. In the west from Northland to Manawatu, also Coromandel and the Central High Country. Occasional showers turning to rain for a time overnight north of Taranaki, possible thunderstorms in the west. Bay of Plenty mainly fine with isolated showers increasing for a time overnight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Waited Upper, Marlborough and Nelson. Mainly fine, a few showers developing overnight, clearing by tomorrow evening. Bulla and Westland, showers north of the glaciers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms, mainly fine further south. For Canterbury, also central and north Otago and Dunedin, mainly fine, isolated showers in Otago, spreading to Canterbury this evening. Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy with occasional showers. Snow lowers to 700 metres tonight and 300 metres later tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, showers. It's 5:07.
Nā mihi Karen, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Hawke's Bay growers say the government support announced for their cyclone-wrecked sector today will be too little too late for some. In March, they asked for $750 million in cold, hard cash to help them recover. But the government has instead announced two schemes to help businesses borrow more money. Our reporter Lauren Crimp was there.
Aside from cash, growers have been desperate for certainty, and today they got it.
This is it. There's nothing more, and I think that is important. If it's good or bad, we know now we can make decisions.
That's Cameron Taylor from Taylor Corp. It was at one of his Waiōhiki apple orchards that Emergency Management Minister Kieran McAnulty made today's announcement. The industry has been waiting months for something, anything from the government, despite making their request very clear early on. What they have now is access to cheaper loans. In the first scheme, banks will grant low-interest loans for all affected businesses, up to $10 million over 5 years, and the government will guarantee 80% of it. Then, for farmers and growers who can't get a bank loan, the government has set aside $240 million to lend them up to $4 million each, with deferred interest over 10 years. Kieran McAnulty says this is the best way to support the sector, with each business facing different challenges.
This package was developed alongside the industry, is that we were talking to them about what they wanted, and being able to have a range of 3 options that is going to assist businesses, I think is landing things about right.
Cameron Taylor says while cash would have been ideal, he wasn't holding his breath the government would stump up. He's most worried about mum and dad orchardists and those who are older and can't afford to get into more debt.
Loans are suffocating, aren't they, as such, and that's why people buy lotto tickets, don't they? But, you know, when you're in your mid to late 60s, more loan, more debt, what are they going to pass on? And it wasn't their fault. It was actually infrastructure failure in a lot of places. They just, pulled out the short straw.
Hawke's Bay Fruit Growers Association President Bryden Nisbet says some smaller growers will now be facing closure. But that could have been avoided if a grant option was included.
I would have liked to have seen still grants, and even if it was on a case-by-case basis of how badly they were hit and how badly they need to build back, a certain grant for so much per hectare just as a kickstart to help them.
But Horticulture New Zealand Chief Executive Nadine Tunley, who was involved in the talks with government, says there was never going to be enough cash to go around because of a policy introduced after the 2004 Manawatu floods.
That policy caps any payment to any single property at $250,000. Most of our properties are bigger than 40 hectares, or a lot of them, so $250,000 wouldn't remediate 1 hectare.
New Zealand Apples and Pears Chair Richard Punter says while there's some relief today, frustration still lingers because it's come so late.
Waiting for months to find out what's going to happen puts you well behind the 8 ball when you're trying to do something in the orchard. If you mix all those things up and the mental stress of having maybe lost your home and all your possessions as well as your orchard and still being confronted by mountains of silken trees, it's a bit of an uphill battle to convince the growers right now that this is a good thing.
The government expects banks will start dishing out the loans by the end of July.
It is 11 minutes after 5. Kia amo tunu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Interested in your thoughts on that one? 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. A loan scheme rather than a grant scheme. What do you think? Cabinet Minister Kiri Allan has put up a fiery defence of her conduct as she returned to Parliament today, flatly denying ever treating staff poorly. It comes after 2 public service bosses acknowledged they were aware of concerns about working relationships in her office more than a year ago. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
It'll mean 2 things. It'll mean that some people that haven't previously been able.
The Justice Minister looking for some justice today, defiant in the face of what she considers an empty attack. She laid down a challenge to opposition MPs on Select Committee: put up or shut up.
This isn't a blood sport for most of us. You have OI age, everything under the sun, and you have still yet to turn anything up.
Kiri Allan has been on a brief stint of mental health leave. She returned into a political storm. The head of DOC, Penny Nelson, has confirmed she flagged concerns about Ms Allan's office with Ministerial Services more than a year ago after a staffer cut their secondment short. The head of emergency management, Dave Gawn, has also separately stated he was aware of problems too. But the exact nature of those concerns is not clear, and Ms Allan says the public service bosses never raised them with her.
Not once, no. I've never had any formal allegations made against me in any way, shape or form. None.
The defence was forthright. She says she's a passionate person, but not a tough boss. She says she does not shout at staff. If there were serious complaints, she says, they would have been put to her.
I'm definitely not a Wellington politician. That's something I'm not. I'm from the regions. We do things a little bit differently, but I think I'm fair. I think I have clear expectations, and when those aren't met, I'm clear about those as well.
Kiri Allan points to the staff turnover in her office as evidence in her favour. She says it is no different from any other ministers.
We're the kind of office that we run hard while we've got the ball. I think it's a pretty great place to work, to be honest.
Neither Penny Nelson from DOC nor Dave Gawn from NEMA were willing to be interviewed today, but some other agencies did come to Ms Allan's support. Executives from both the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment were grilled before Select Committee and questioned by the media about their experience with the Minister.
Our staff have never had any concerns in the office.
We have a very highly functional relationship with Minister Allan's office.
In fact, I have had far more challenging ministers to deal with in the past.
The National Party says there are still unanswered questions.
What has actually gone on here and how have these issues been resolved?
It will be disappointing for New Zealanders to see ministers drawn into these sideshows right when they need to be focused on fixing our country's big problems.
Ms Allan wasn't the only minister distracted today. The Powerful Privileges Committee, made up of MPs across Parliament, has reported back after grilling Jan Tinetti for misleading the House and taking too long to correct the record. It did not find her in contempt, but did criticise her for a high degree of negligence.
I accept the committee's findings and I apologise to the House.
Both ministers will be hoping today ends the matter for them both. So too the Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, who returns from China on Saturday.
Our political editor, Jane Patterson, is travelling with the Prime Minister in China and she joins us now. Jane, so the Prime Minister's moved on to Shanghai, but the questions about his ministers are still following him.
That's right. So after Kiri Allan's responses to the media today, he is sticking with his position that there have been no formal complaints, so therefore he sees the situation as basically being the same as yesterday. That is, he doesn't see any particular problem at the moment with his minister, or not any that he is talking about. Now, he said that all ministerial officers get extra support. He was asked, have there been any instances where the office of Kiri Allan needed extra support, extra management? And he said he wouldn't catalogue individual examples of that, but when ministerial officers come under pressure, they get the support from the Prime Minister's office. Now, he did say that since we talked to him yesterday, he has spoken to Kiri Allan. He said primarily that was to check in and make sure that she was okay, but he also, again, without going into specifics, alluded to the fact that they had a brief conversation about any other issues that might come up, is there anything else I need to know kind of a conversation, and he said that he would be having a fuller discussion with her when he gets back. He said that in terms of the roll call of ministerial mistakes and sackings and resignations, they are certainly not helpful, and particularly when you're on an overseas trip like this and with big diplomatic meetings, to be talking about ministers in trouble back home is not helpful. It's not helpful. It's a distraction that he doesn't need. I asked him whether the message had got through to the Cabinet and the wider executive about the expectations of, basic competence, basic following the rules, and he said, of course, that message had been delivered and they should be under no illusion about the expectation he has of the standard he expects.
OK, so overseas trip aside, Jane, what does it mean for Chris Hipkins heading into election season?
Well, that was another one of the questions in terms of snap election. I mean, at what point do you get to the point where you call an early election? For example, if there is a suggestion that the public has lost confidence in the government, that the ministerial controversies become too much and the Prime Minister decides to go to the polls. Chris Hipkins says nowhere near that at all. He is not looking at or considering a snap election. He says that that Labor has a majority. There is no suggestion of instability or a lack of confidence in Parliament to be able to do anything. So he said not at this stage at all. He did say in terms of Kiri Allan that again he was asked whether she had indicated whether she would stand at the next election. He said that she had not indicated to him that she would not, but also it's something that he would not ask directly. But look, the closer the election gets, each time these things happen, it is more damaging. And as we've spoke about before, it's the cumulative effect. When you have 2, 3, 4 ministers on the trot, Jan Tinetti today having to apologise to the House after that Privileges Committee hearing, it all piles up. So again, that message would be going back to the ministers. Even though these events have been historic, it's the handling of them, and as we've seen with Stuart Nash and Michael Wood, he gave them the benefit of the doubt and then suffered, in terms of the Prime Minister and the government, major political damage as more allegations rolled out over the week. So they need to get their act together and really keep it tight, because they just cannot afford to keep spending this capital.
Okay, what about the business in China? What's been happening today?
So we had the main political big diplomatic meetings in Beijing, of course, including with President Xi. The Prime Minister flew to Shanghai today, which is really much more of a business and trade focus. Of course, we have a large business delegation, and he has described the trip so far as very successful, and he said that the message for New Zealand is open for business, and an added extra from the Trade Minister and pleasure. He said he wants people to come to New Zealand not just for business but for fun. But of course, remember, Jacinda Ardern said that this has been a catch cry for New Zealand Prime Minister since the borders opened for COVID, really trying to get that trade back up, trying to restore tourism, international students. So the rest of today and tomorrow will be very much about connecting with businesses here. We've just had a really interesting panel actually and a presentation on how New Zealand businesses find doing business in China. They said that one of the biggest things was visa processing times, which is something that the government actually can sort out. So some really practical feedback from the business community here about doing business in China at the moment and what would make it better for them in the future.
Thank you, Jane. That is our political editor, Jane Patterson, joining us live there from China, 19 minutes after 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's get to some of your feedback now, coming in on the loan schemes for cyclone-hit farmers. Simon says a cheap loan isn't good enough for cyclone-affected businesses. Maybe Luxon was right this rare time, wet and whiny. Another says large corporation apple growers don't need free money. They have massive assets. And one listener says, I really hope the same people who reject the idea of handouts are not quibbling about the offer of a government loan for their recovery after the cyclone. Please start talking about taxpayers supporting farmers rather than the government. It makes a difference to their demands. Another listener says, do keep your feedback coming. 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. That's that two-tier scheme that the government has announced today. They're underwriting loans from banks and for businesses, cyclone-affected businesses that can't get a bank loan. They can apply to the government for one. Terms and conditions apply, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the program. But do send your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. The email address, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for us to head over to the headlines. Ko Karen Arnold tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. As you've been hearing, the government says it expects banks will start giving out loans to cyclone-hit growers in Hawke's Bay by the end of July. The sector had asked for $750 million in cash to help it recover, but instead the government has set out two schemes to help businesses borrow up to $4 million each. The Justice Minister is challenging national MPs to substantiate their claims of her staff being mistreated. Two public service bosses have admitted they were aware of concerns about working relationships in Kiri Allan's office more than a year ago. Ms Allan says she has never treated workers poorly and says no one has ever raised formal allegations. Primary school principals and the Educational Institute have accepted the Education Ministry's most recent pay offer, which includes 3 staged increases and a $4,500 lump sum. Only secondary and area school teachers' pay disputes remain unresolved. Wellington Mayor Tori Whanau says she will seek changes to the city's multi-billion-dollar transport revamp after councillors narrowly gave it their backing this afternoon. Let's Get Wellington Moving includes stripping the Golden Mile from Lambton Quay to Courtney Place of vehicles, except buses, and pedestrianisation. And Morocco is recalling its ambassador to Sweden after a copy of the Quran was burned at a Stockholm demonstration as Muslims were celebrating one of their holiest days. The demonstration's organiser is being investigated for incitement to hatred. Looking at the traffic in Auckland, State Highway 20, the southwestern motorway is clear again after an earlier truck breakdown. Slips in the Dome Valley north of Auckland mean State Highway 1 remains closed between Wellsford and Warkworth. And on the Coromandel, State Highway 25 is open for another 10 minutes or so till 5:30 before closing again overnight. I'll be back with more news headlines and any traffic updates around 20 to 6.
Ngā mihi, Karen. For the first time since their gripping World Cup victory last year, our Black Ferns return to action tonight. New Zealand will meet Australia in Brisbane for their first test of 2023, and it will be a bit of a new look side to kick off the season. And joining me now is our sports reporter, Jonty Dine. So it's going to be a big night tonight for the Ferns, Jonty.
Kia ora, Lisa. Yes, the side's back, and it's a bit of a new dawn for the Black Ferns. So as you mentioned, the first time since their return since their, of course, incredible World Cup win that gripped the nation. But there's a host of stars from that game who will be missing tonight. This includes Ruby Tui, Stacey Flula, Portia Woodman, Sarah Hirini, and of course Kendra Coxage. 6 new players potentially to make their debuts, and a new coaching team as well taking the reins. So among the debutants, we've got halfbacks Arihana Marino Tahinu and Iritana Huhaya. So this is a position that's very much up for grabs now that Kendra Coxage has hung up her boots after a number of years sort of with a stranglehold on that jersey. So a great opportunity for these players to stake their claim, and they bring different skills to the role. Hidiana, for example, is a sevens player. Is a sevens player, so brings plenty of pace. While Tahinu has played for the Kiwi Ferns, so she can mix it up with the physical stuff. But it is a big hole that Coxage leaves. I mean, her game smarts, her experience, they can't be replaced overnight. Head coach Alan Bunting says they'll be sticking with the tried and true game plan, although with a few tweaks. They want to bring their own flavour to the team, but as he said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
There's definitely a few things that these ladies held on through the World Cup that I think really ignited our country. So there's not going to be real massive changes, but certainly excited to see the new influence of the new coaches. It'd be good to test where we're at.
Now, but Bunting says attacking rugby is in the DNA of the Black Ferns, so that's very unlikely to change. They're heavy favourites for tonight. TAB has them at $6 for a win. And the last time they met, it was a pretty dominant 41-17 win by the Black Ferns. That was, of course, at last year's World Cup. This also doubles as a Pacific Four test, I should say, where the Black Ferns need to finish in the top 3 to qualify for that new tournament, the World 15 tournament, which has been described as a mini World Cup, something to look forward to. So kickoff is 9 p.m, slightly late for New Zealand fans.
Slightly late, John D, yeah.
But I'm sure they'll brave it to support our side.
Hey, this next story is a little bit concerning. Kiwi surfer Maz Quinn, a lot of people will know the name, has suffered a pretty bad accident in Hawke's Bay.
Yeah, that's right. So Max is actually in intensive care after a pretty serious surfing incident in Mahia. He posted on social media that a solid wave picked him up and threw him into the rocky ledge bottom of the shore, and he was washed up, but he couldn't walk on the beach. He had to crawl for about 20 minutes to get help, and he said the pain was incredibly intense. So he was airlifted to hospital with 4 broken ribs and multiple broken transverse processes. So those are little bones at the base of the spine. Luckily, a paramedic was in the car park to assist with Max, and he's obviously still in hospital, so we certainly wish him a speedy recovery.
Yeah,
Lisa.
all the best to Maz Quinn for that. Thank you so much, Jonty. Jonty Dine, our sports reporter there. Police Police are investigating several claims of abuse, assault and intimidation against Horowhenua District Council staff. The Mayor's spoken out, saying they're witnessing a concerning pattern of unacceptable behaviour towards workers. Horowhenua District Council Chief Executive Monique Davidson joins us now. Kia ora, Monique.
Oh, kia ora, Lisa.
This does not sound pleasant. What sort of things are staff experiencing?
Yeah, look, it isn't pleasant, and it's certainly not the sort of thing that I'm wanting to see my staff subject to. I think it's worth noting that council staff over many months and many years have no doubt had to witness and had to experience things like this. But unfortunately, we've seen an increase in this sort of behaviour. And last week there were 3 particular incidents which required us to engage police, and obviously there's subsequent investigations. So we're talking about incidents that range from a physical assault on a parking warden to instances where staff who are going about their everyday business and leaving a council premises, walking down the public main street, being videoed and approached by members of the public, to an incident that has resulted in a number of verbal threats and abuse towards a range of staff. So all behaviour that I think we'd all agree that not just council staff, but actually any public servant should be subject to.
And how are the staff feeling? Do they feel unsafe going out on their lunch breaks?
Look, I think staff are feeling well supported by Horowhenua District Council. I think they're also feeling well supported by the community. We had a number of businesses and members of the community that stood up and supported us, particularly last week through a number of incidents. But I think it's fair to say that they've had enough, and hence why it was so important that Mayor Burney and I put out the joint statement so that our community could not just understand that it's not just maybe what they see on social media in terms of what's often the aggressive online behaviour, but actually the physical intimidation and behaviour that we're now seeing staff have to face.
Yeah, so Monique, it's real world as well. It's not just on the internet.
No, this is real. This is real life stuff. And I think it's important we acknowledge that we see this stuff digitally. So we have staff that obviously have to experience this online behaviour. But no, we're talking about physical intimidation, in one instance, alleged physical assault. And we're talking about behaviour that is unacceptable and behaviour that
Are you there, Monique? Oh, I think we've lost Monique Davidson. They're talking about an increase in the number of intimidation incidents, abuse and even an alleged assault that she was talking about there against staff at the Horowhenua District Council. The matters have been referred to the police. It is 5:30. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news. Ko taku hoe e nai called Giles Beckford. Giles joins us from the Wellington studio. Okay, Giles, so businesses still miserable, but less miserable in a new survey?
That's right. It's probably the best way to describe it. Rather than saying that, the business confidence is improved, we would just say that they're still pessimistic, but not as many are as pessimistic about the broad economy outlook for the coming year. In fact, the sentiment level is at its best since September 2021. So there's quite a reasonable jump there. And when they look at their own businesses, this is called the Own Activity Index. And it's probably a more accurate read of the way businesses feel about how their own prospects look. They've actually gone positive for the first time, optimistic for the first time in 14 months. So we'll take this as being a positive sign. The ANZ Bank says they put it down to the signal sent by the Reserve Bank that interest rates probably come to an end. The interest rate rises, and so the businesses are buoyed by that. The inflation pressures seem to be easing a little bit. They're still having trouble finding labour, but not quite as much. They think the profit outlook, it's not as negative as it was once was. So all these things combined, making them feel a little bit better. Now, it'll be interesting to see whether that's reflected next week and probably what is the premier business confidence survey done by the Institute of Economic Reserve, called the Quarterly Survey of Business Opinion. That's the one that the Reserve Bank in particular pays close attention to. We'll see if that sort of tallies with what we're seeing in these monthly surveys. And tomorrow, ANZ will give us the latest look, their monthly look at consumer confidence, remembering we had Westpac last week on that one.
IKEA, it seems, has a shopping list of its own. Giles, what is on that list?
You probably didn't realise, but they've just been quietly acquiring forests around the country. And it's just come out from the Overseas Investment Office that they've given the green light for IKEA, or in fact a subsidiary of IKEA's biggest franchisee, let's just say IKEA. Given them permission to acquire close to 1,000 hectares at Chineroto near Gisborne. Now, they plan to convert about 2/3 of that, which is currently sheep, beef and deer farming, into commercial forestry. The other third will be left in buildings, waterways, native bush and the like. But they've been just quietly hoovering up sites around the country. And by my reckoning, they've probably acquired somewhere in the region of 11 to 12,000 hectares of forests in the past couple of years. They've been acquiring them Southland, Otago, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa, Whanganui. So, where they can find a forest at the right price, they're willing to acquire it or turn a farm and turn it into forest. And the question is, why would they? I mean, do they plan to manufacture the furniture here? I suspect not, but they do have a policy of offsetting their emissions and buying forests and using forest units and the carbon sequestration that comes from forests. That's good from their point of view, and I would expect that we'll see them do more of this as time goes by. Of course, it feeds into that debate as to whether we're losing good productive farmland into forestry, something which I think is still to be resolved.
And Giles, let's stroll through the market numbers, please.
A little stroll and amble. The top 50 index, another good day, up 75 points. We seem to be in a pattern at the moment where it's a bit sluggish to get out of bed and we don't quite know which way we're going. But when Australia opens up and we see what the wind is like there, we turn positive. And today, up 75 points. It's about 0.2%, 11,808. The New Zealand dollar's just sitting quietly, 60.75 US cents and 91.9 Australian.
Thank you, Giles. Ka kite, Giles Beckford, live from Wellington with business news. Officials are still trying to reach those who haven't done this year's census with community events and incentives. The final deadline to complete the census is tomorrow at 5 p.m. The unofficial participation rate is sitting at around 89%, just short of the 90% target. So over the next 24 hours, officials are hoping around 51,000 New Zealanders fill out the form. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi have the story.
The official final day to fill out your census form was over 3 months ago. But in order to capture as many New Zealanders as possible, Stats NZ is giving people until 5 p.m. on Friday to provide their information.
It was my sisters that had encouraged us to come fill out our census form. Yeah, so we ended up coming down to fill it out.
Sisters Kim and Yunga are filling in the census for the first time at Butterbean Motivation Gym in Manukau. Kim says it wasn't something she felt she knew enough about until now.
To be honest, I actually didn't acknowledge it. I didn't understand what it was for this year. Yeah, I've kind of clued on more.
She's encouraging those who haven't done so already to fill theirs in.
Be accountable, you gotta I think we've got to be right. We've got to do right for our younger generations coming up. If we don't sign up, we're not going to get a say.
Census data helps government to understand how we're changing as a country and is used to determine new policies, research, planning and to make crucial decisions in areas like health, education and housing. Yunga says she thought the process was more complicated than it actually is.
Didn't realise it was just a piece of paper, a couple of questions, and it would help better our country, our community and ourselves.
Stats NZ says the estimated number of forms submitted compared with the predicted population indicates that around 89% of people have done the census so far. The estimated Pasifika response rate is about 79% and Māori is at 75%. In order to boost those numbers, community organisations like Butterbean Gym have been brought on board. Butterbean's Dave Latele says they've signed up 300 people in the last month, offering supermarket vouchers and food parcels to those who turn up.
There was a queue at 8:30 in the morning there for people to come and complete their census to pick up a food parcel. These are people that are very, very hard to reach. When they come in, we can connect with them and see what else they need, going forward. So it really is a blessing.
Mr. Latele admits this year is his first time doing it too.
43, I think, this year, and this is the first year ever I've completed the census. And it comes from my first introduction to the system was when the police raided my house and stole all my Christmas presents. That was my first introduction to the system, and I hated the system from that day on. That's the problem, is a lot of our people experiences with the system has not been good.
The team has been working to educate people on how their information will be used. But he says in order to reach high response rates, work with the community must continue.
If you want to look at next census, we need to be continuing this mahi onwards, working with community groups, working with marae that have the trust of the people to try and continue that education.
Another partner is Manurewa Marae, which has been promoting the census since March, organising pop-up community events, offering kai and koha. Chief Executive Takutai Moana Natasha Kemp says an intergenerational mistrust of authority puts some people off. But the marae is a safe place.
We've recently, demonstrated that through COVID, setting up a local vaccination centre here in 4 days. The Prime Minister came here and got vaccinated. So we have a lot of, good things happening here where people see us and so they say, we trust Manurewa Marae.
They'd love to see the numbers go higher, but she says it hasn't been easy getting to this point.
We think about where we were 2 months ago, we're at like 20%, and so to get the numbers up like this, especially here in Tamaki Makaurau, that's an attribute to those partners that are out there working.
She says partner agencies should have been given resources far earlier.
For Te Paeherenga Tamaki partners, we got the resource came 60 days ago. So 60 days to do your amount of work that you've been asked to do for your community, that's just rubbish. But we do it because we know we can, but really that kind of money, that kind of resource needed to come months ago.
Officials won't know for sure if the 90% target has been reached until next year, once post-census surveys are completed.
Right, so there is still time if you haven't filled out your census. You've got another day, so get on to it. And if you're listening on radio, the video version of that story will be on our webpage. It is 20 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaro, do keep your feedback coming on anything you've heard on the program tonight. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ and the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Karen is here with the headlines. Anea Karen, mena pita pita kōrero.
The Prime Minister says it was appropriate for the Education Minister to apologise for misleading the House. Parliament's Privileges Committee ruled Jan Tinetti took too long to correct an inaccurate statement on school attendances. It put the error down to negligence rather than an intention to mislead. Chris Hipkins calls the situation regrettable. Cyclone-hit Hawke's Bay farmers say a government loan scheme is no silver bullet to get them back on track. The government says it will guarantee loans up to 80% to make lending more appealing for banks and offer loans itself to land-based businesses who don't qualify for a bank loan. A Wellington councillor says she hopes today's narrow vote in favour of the city's multi-billion-dollar transport revamp has highlighted some of its issues. Let's Get Wellington Moving will take vehicles except buses off the Golden Mile and bring light rail from the railway station to Island Bay. Diane Calvert hopes public and councillors' concerns will be listened to. The US Coast Guard says presumed human remains have been recovered from the wreckage of the submersible that imploded while diving to the Titanic earlier this month. 5 people died. And more than 100 million people across Canada and the United States are under air quality alerts as smoke from wildfires in Quebec drifts westward. Canada's biggest city, Toronto, had the worst air of all major cities in the world on Wednesday. Looking at the traffic, slips in the Dome Valley north of Auckland mean State Highway 1 remains closed between Wellsford and Warkworth. On the Coromandel, State Highway 25 is closed again for overnight work. And State Highway 2 Carterton to Masterton, plan ahead for various stop-goes tonight for ongoing works. No other incidents to report. We'll have more news at 6.
Thanks, Karen. The Red Cross has now earmarked $12 million of its New Zealand Disaster Fund for projects in weather and cyclone-hit regions. $26.5 million has been donated. It has a 3-pronged approach, co-funding initiatives to support community recovery, immediate help for the clean-up and funding for future resilience. New Zealand Red Cross Secretary-General Sarah Stewart-Black joins us now. Kia ora, Sarah.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Can you give us a bit of a taster? Where has the $12 million gone so far?
Well, it's actually gone to support 150 organisations, and the kinds of things that the money is funding is everything from food banks, temporary accommodation, clean-up support, mental health programs, community events, restoring water supplies, and a whole range of other things.
So how has a demand been versus the resources you've got to give out?
So we've approved 150 grants. There have been grants that we've received that have been declined because they haven't met the criteria that we've set out, and that's understandable that we work those things through. But there's clearly need on the ground in those communities by whānau that are really struggling. So we see that, and we're trying to make sure that we're able to use this money to reach as many people as we can.
So that's less than half of it out the door so far. Are you going fast enough, and what are the barriers to getting it spent, in essence?
So we know there's a really fine balance for us, making sure we take the time to understand where those needs are and how we can help as many people as we can, with also getting that money out. We have made that commitment around saying by August we will have the majority of the fund committed, and we're still on track to do that. We have seen that with the grants program, it's enabled us to streamline and be able to increase the speed that we've been able to commit that money out to organisations. So we're certainly feeling like we're making very real practical progress.
It is a 3-pronged approach, right? 3 categories. Do you know, broadly speaking, how you're splitting the money across those 3 categories? One of them being for future resilience and future emergencies.
Yeah, so we're thinking that, we've committed almost 11 million so far into that first kind of area of immediate response and early recovery. We've got a second core program on this partnerships and recovery, which we're looking at a home bundles program, which I can talk more about. And those 2 programs we're aiming to have committed by that beginning of August deadline. The remaining part of the fund we're estimating is around $5 million, and that will be used to build future preparedness and resilience. And that's what we'll really be focused on between August and the first anniversary. So the entire fund will be committed by the time we hit that first anniversary of these events.
Tell us about the bundle.
So this is what we're working through now that we've kind of been able to progress through the grants program. It's looking at how do we support those families that have been hardest hit. We're so conscious with winter coming back, people moving back into homes that were damaged or potentially into new homes but may have lost everything. And this is about how we can support those people who really will struggle to get back on their feet to replace the basic items people need in their homes. So this will include whiteware, beds, bedding, all the kind of core appliances, crockery, cutlery, glassware, towels, bedding, all of those things that people need, so that right from the start we're able to support them to get back on their feet and support their families.
So Sarah, that's for uninsured people, I assume?
It's going to be looking at those that are most vulnerable, and in many cases those are people that are uninsured or don't have the financial means to be able to get back on their feet.
And how much have you earmarked for that particular project?
We're estimating around $10 million, and we're working with a range of organisations at the moment in the hardest hit areas as a priority to be able to work through who are the families that are in need of that support. We know that $10 million is not going to cover all of the need across the affected areas, but we think that this can make a significant difference to around 700 to 800 households, depending on the family size and the kinds of items that they need. That's what we're estimating here.
We're almost out of time, Sarah, but can people or agencies still apply for money, or is that it? You've closed up shop?
We've closed off the grants program for now because we wanted to make sure we had enough money for the bundles program. If that situation changes, then of course we will do another call out for further grants.
Appreciate your time. That is New Zealand Red Cross Secretary-General Sarah Stewart-Black there, just explaining where all that money is going that people donated after the severe weather events. It is 12 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Returning to our earlier story, the government has announced support schemes for cyclone-hit businesses. Growers and farmers who can't get bank loans will be able to borrow from a government fund as long as they meet certain T's and C's. The government is also underwriting up to 80% of bank loans to cyclone-affected businesses. Now, under that scheme, bank loans guaranteed by the government should come at cheaper interest rates, according to Emergency Management Minister Kieran McAnulty.
It'll mean two things. It'll mean that some people that haven't previously been able to get loans will now do so, and those that can get them are likely to get them in more favourable terms. So even a marginal decrease in interest rates could mean tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars benefit at the end of the term for some lenders, or borrowers, I should say.
So have the banks agreed to that and guaranteed that they will offer lower interest rates?
Yeah, we've been in close contact with the banks throughout the development of this policy. So too have we with the horticulture industry. We wouldn't have come out today with this policy if we weren't confident the banks were going to follow through.
And they have said they will give lower interest rates on the back of a Crown guarantee.
Well, keeping in mind that it's Minister Robertson and O'Connor that have developed the policy with them, but that's the assurance that I've been given, yes.
Okay. Businesses turned down for loans from banks can now get one essentially from the government. Can you give us an example of a business that would qualify for that?
Well, what we're saying is that a concessional loan of up to $4 million for 10 years. So the interest will be deferred during that time. And the businesses I've got in mind are people that might have a small family-run orchard whose trees have been flattened. They don't want to leave their land. It's going to take 7 years for the trees to start bearing fruit. But with a 10-year window, they can do the investment to plant the trees and they don't have to start paying it back or with interest until the fruit starts to bear profits for that business. And the feedback I've received is that that's exactly the sort of thing they need to help them through this time.
Are they really viable businesses, though?
Oh, absolutely they are. But at the moment, there's too much uncertainty for some formal lenders to provide the capital that these businesses need. But that's why we've got the packages we have. One for businesses in general, that's the loan guarantee scheme, the concessional loan scheme that we're talking about now. But for some operators, they're not in a position to take on extra debt. But that's where the equity option comes in, 25% of their business the government will buy into with a buyback scheme over 5 years. This has been devised in conjunction with the industry. The criteria is such that they will need to demonstrate that they, one, have been severely hit, but two, that they will be viable with this support. The fact is that viable businesses will fall over unless we brought this in, and we weren't willing to let that happen.
How many businesses do you think will qualify for that?
I can't give you a number, but the feedback that we had is that there are a not insignificant number of businesses that would otherwise fall over. And given the importance of agriculture, horticulture to all the affected regions, we're talking about from the top of Northland all the way down to the southern Wairarapa coast, that's too much of a risk to take, not just for the regional economy, but the national one as well. You know, if we let these horticulture businesses in particular fall over, they might not recover, and that's a huge hit to that sector.
Did you not do any forecasting in terms of how many businesses need that and would fold without it, and how many qualify?
Well, we've been speaking to the banks as well in development of this, and they've given us an indication of the number of their customers that at the moment they're on the edge as to whether they could get lending or not. So we've had a bit of a steer.
And what did they tell you about that? What kind of figures did they give you?
I can't right this moment give you a specific figure, but I can tell you that it's led to us giving a firm number on the concessionary loan and equity scheme of 240. But we've been upfront around the potential investment through the loan guarantee scheme. We've said it will be over $1 billion, but ultimately it will depend on how many banks end up signing up to it. We've got a likely figure if all the banks come in mind, but we won't know for sure until we have them all. And I don't want to steer you crook by giving you a finger in the air thing at the moment.
Okay, so where's that money coming from?
It's been all factored through. It's been budgeted for and accounted for in the books. One benefit of having the Minister of Cyclone Recovery, also the Minister of Finance, is you make sure those things are tidied off before you go out with a policy.
So is it reprioritised spending or unspent money from somewhere else? I mean, can you be more specific?
I can't, and I'm sorry about that. I've come here as Minister of Emergency Management to announce it in Hawke's Bay as the Minister responsible for this region. The Minister of Finance will be able to give you that details, but I'll pass that on and make sure we get it to you.
The thing is, if people can't meet the criteria for a commercial loan from the bank, why should the taxpayer prop them up? It sounds pretty risky.
Well, the loan guarantee scheme is 80% of the loan. And what it does is it gives the banks confidence to be able to do what they weren't confident to do before. But the banks still aren't going to lend money if it's going to fall over, because it's still going to come at a cost to the banks. This is about providing reassurance and certainty to the sector. But ultimately, the criteria of such are going through the concessionary loan or the equity thing. They still need to demonstrate that they will otherwise be a viable business. We have been very clear that this isn't going to help everyone, that there are some businesses, a small number, that are likely to fall over, but we've set this up for those that can thrive, if we back them, will be able to do so.
And that was the Emergency Management Minister, Kiri Allan. Now, the government has also announced an inquiry into the emergency response to the severe weather events, and it expects that to be complete by March next year. Let's get to some of your feedback now, specifically on that scheme that they've announced. This person says, quite frankly, the sector's lack of any kind of gratitude for the announced government support leaves me disappointed. My family had to wait 8 years for a resolution to our Christchurch earthquake-damaged house. Waiting a few months is reasonable considering the extent of the damage. Mary Jane says, come on, government, these folks desperately need help. And another listener says, with 80% of export earnings coming from the primary sector and those earnings then driving the rest of the country's economic activity, i.e. everyone's earnings, maybe it's time to celebrate and support farmers and growers rather than deride them. And on the census, someone's got in touch to say, all I learnt this year from the census was to hold out on filling the form in until there were some bribes on offer. Do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Eid al-Adha was celebrated in Wellington today for the second year in a row. Last year, the celebration drew a crowd of around 4,000 for the holy celebration, which happens 2 months after the end of Ramadan. Reporter Crystal Gibbons and camera operator Angus Drever were at Sky Stadium for the celebrations.
The day started with prayers led by the Imam of Kilburney's Islamic Centre, Muhammad Ziwalda. He says Eid is known as Sacrifice Day.
This is to commemorate the event of Hajj pilgrimage in Mecca, which is taking place at the same time in Mecca, Saudi Arabia. Allahu Akbar.
Among those taking part this morning was Ansar, supported by wife Miriam.
I think it's nice to be a part of Ansar's culture and religion, so it's nice to take part in that, even though you're not really a part of it in a way. It's a bit like an outsider.
Event spokesperson Amal Ashimi says the celebration is about bringing people together and all are welcome.
Straight after the prayers, there are food stalls, traditional food stalls, free games for kids of different ages like laser tag, bouncy castles, face painting and henna.
For the kids in particular, the day is a ball.
We've been running around, bouncing on bouncy castles. And we were waiting in the line for candy floss.
We prayed and we listened to the khutbah, and then I went over to play laser tag, and now I'm getting food from Roti King.
And the face painting, I painted with some rose and glitter and color of blue, and now it's amazing. I made it amazing.
But it's not all fun and games. For Muhammad Ziwalda, a celebration like this wouldn't have been imaginable when he first arrived in the country in the wake of 9/11.
There was a kind of misconception that all Muslims are terrorists or all Muslims are violent, which was actually not the case.
But he says that attitude has changed. For couple Miriam and Ansar, whose own families didn't believe they'd last, it's also been a case of surviving the opposition.
We've shown that you can overcome anything if you love each other and have trust. You know, religion is not, won't come in the way. It's about respecting each other's identity.
Celebrating culture and coming together to share it.
Let's get to some of your feedback now. A lot of you have got in touch about the interview we did on Horuwhenua District Council staff suffering abuse. This person says it's a miracle anyone still works in local government. The abuse and disdain from the public, coupled with rubbish pay and conditions. Who'd sign up for that? And another says, as a former senior council officer, I've had only one death threat and experienced 2 physical assaults. Wow, while we never know the wars people are fighting, when we meet them, at least these days, the employer takes them seriously as opposed to accepting it as part of the job. Someone else is wondering if they can listen to Monique Davidson again. They only caught the end of the interview of her talking. It will be on our web page a little later, so check it out there and you can catch up. Oh, a love letter for Giles Beckford, our business editor, who says, it's a message for Giles. Thanks for your really interesting analysis of IKEA forestry purchases. I wish you had more time to go into it more deeply. Thanks again. Don't tempt him with the offer of more time, Tim. He'll be like, taking liberties. On the subject of Kiri Allan, one listener says the story is just a beat up about something that was supposed to have happened a year ago. Actually confirmed by the Department of Conservation and also NEMA, Emergency Management, and the Prime Minister have acknowledged it as well. Working in the office of a Cabinet Minister is often a pressure situation, another listener says. One anonymous employee leaving and the media haul Kiri Allan over the coals. Give her a break, says Jeff. And this too, I think $1 billion cost overrun on 3 waters is more newsworthy than whether Kiri Allan had a bad day in the office.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. I'm Karen McCarthy. Cyclone hit Hawke's Bay growers say the government has taken far too long to come up with a scheme to help them get back on their feet. They can now get concessionary loans and equity finance of up to $4 million per business from a pool of up to $240 million. The government will also underwrite loans up to 80% to make lending more appealing for retail banks. Apples and Pears Chair Richard Punter says while there is relief at the news, the months-long wait for details of government support has caused a huge amount of stress, and growers will take some convincing that this is a good solution. The Prime Minister says it was appropriate for the Education Minister to apologise for misleading the House. Parliament's Privileges Committee has determined that Jan Tinetti misled the House earlier this year by taking too long to correct an inaccurate statement. The committee says this reflected a high degree of negligence on her part rather than any ill intention, and it has not found her guilty of contempt. Chris Hipkins says the situation is regrettable.
I think it's appropriate that Jan's owned that mistake, I understand, of course I haven't been there, but I understand that she's now issued an apology to the House. I think that was the appropriate thing to do.
Jan Tinetti apologised in the House this afternoon and has accepted the committee's finding. A new survey suggests businesses are feeling less pessimism about the economic outlook. ANZ's June survey shows a net 18% of firms expect the economy to get worse, compared with 31% the month before. The bank's chief economist, Sharon Zollner, says businesses have been buoyed by the Reserve Bank's signal that interest rate rises might be over.
The Reserve Bank has said that they think they're probably done with rate hikes. That in itself might be seen as reducing a source of risk to the outlook for firms. Another thing is probably the sharp lift in migration, which has eased labour shortages considerably.
The more closely followed own activity measure turned optimistic for the first time in 14 months at 3%. Wellington Mayor Tori Whanau says she's not surprised by a council vote against withdrawing from the Let's Get Wellington Moving programme, but says she will call for changes to it. The controversial project includes banning vehicles except buses from the Golden Mile and introducing light rail from the railway station to Island Bay. Councillors today voted 9-7 against withdrawing from it. One of those who favoured withdrawal, Councillor Diane Calvert, says that despite being disappointed by the vote, she's glad the Let's Get Wellington Moving board is finally being responsive.
The main thing is that we have really put a spotlight on the failings of the actual structure, the governance of the whole program. We've had more transparency or more information from them in the last 3 weeks than I've seen in the last 3 years. The police are investigating claims of abuse, assault and intimidation against Horowhenua District Council staff by members of the public. Mayor Bernie Wandin and Council Chief Executive Monique Davidson say a concerning pattern of unacceptable behaviour towards staff has ramped up recently. Ms Davidson told Checkpoint that last week alone there was an alleged physical assault on a parking warden, a staff member was approached and videoed on the street, and other staff were subject to verbal threats and abuse.
All behaviour that I think we'd all agree that not just council staff, but actually any public servant should be subject to.
Monique Davidson says staff have had enough. The Maritime Union is warning of possible economic pitfalls if Ports of Auckland is privatised. In a new report, the International Transport Workers Federation describes the council-owned ports automation project as a failure on every measure. 3 port workers were killed in accidents on the job between 2018 and 2022. Union Secretary Craig Harrison says privatising the ports would come at a cost.
If you sell it or lease out, it becomes a private monopoly. Now, if the port returning, for instance, $58 million a year to the council, they want any company that comes in, whatever they pay for the lease, will want a profit on top of that. So the only way they're going to get that is either cut the conditions of workers. In the end, they'll have to put up the charges to the port users.
Craig Harrison says the ports do need to be more efficient as some parts remain underutilised. Madonna has postponed an upcoming world tour after contracting a serious bacterial infection. The 64-year-old American singer fell ill at the weekend and spent several days in intensive care. US media are reporting she was rushed to hospital after being found in an unresponsive condition. Here's the BBC's Sophie Long.
We are told that her health is improving and that she is expected to make a full recovery. But at the moment, we are told she is still undergoing medical care. And so as a result, her team has decided to suspend all commitments, which of course includes the celebration tour. Now, the tour was scheduled to kick off in Vancouver next month, and it's to mark the 40th anniversary of her breakout single Holiday. And it was much anticipated. When tickets went on sale, 98% of them sold out immediately, with fans buying up 600,000 tickets in one day.
Independent global energy researchers are predicting that China will double its capacity to generate renewable energy by 2025, hitting government targets 5 years ahead of schedule. The US-based Global Energy Monitor Group says China already generates more utility-scale solar energy than the rest of the world combined and has made huge strides in wind capacity. At the same time, China continues to build dozens of new coal-fired power stations, partly to provide backup supply to solar and wind parks. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, the role of Children's Commissioner will be scrapped from July 1st. So who takes over as the advocate for the country's kids? The Fiordland Wapiti Foundation has a big weekend ahead celebrating a century of wapiti hunting in New Zealand. We delve into the life of Kim Yo-jong, the sister of Kim Jong-un and the most powerful woman in North Korea. Could she be the next Supreme Leader? With me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
On air, online and on demand. Back to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight on Friday, and it's an updated one. In the west, from Northland to Manawatu, also Coromandel and the Central High Country. Showers, mainly north of Taranaki, turning to rain there for a time overnight. Thunderstorms possible in the west. Bay of Plenty, mainly fine with isolated showers, increasing for a time overnight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Wairarapa, Marlborough and Nelson. Mainly fine, but a few showers developing overnight, clearing by tomorrow evening. Bulla and Westland, showers north of the glaciers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms, mainly fine further south. Canterbury, also central and north Otago and Dunedin, mainly fine, isolated showers in Otago, spreading to Canterbury this evening. Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy with occasional showers, snow lowering to 700 metres tonight and 300 metres later tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, showers. It's 6:07.
Kia ora rā e ho. No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The Prime Minister's mission to China has again been plagued by questions about one of his senior ministers back home. Kiri Allan has denied ever treating staff poorly after it was revealed some public service agencies have flagged concerns about the environment in her office. The Department of Conservation has confirmed a staff member ended their secondment in the minister's office early due to problems with workplace relationships. And the National Emergency Management Agency Chief Executive has confirmed he was aware of concerns regarding relationships in the office. Kiri Allan was back in Parliament today after taking mental health leave. Speaking to media in Shanghai, Prime Minister Chris Hipkins denied the issue has overshadowed his trip to China.
Well, my focus during the time I've been in China has been very much on developing the government-to-government relationship, helping to support our business delegation who are doing an incredible job, and promoting New Zealand. That's where my focus has been over the last 4 days. I think that's where it should have been. I have confidence in all of my ministers.
A lot of these events have been historic, but what's your message to ministers in the run-up to a very close and tight election about being competent, doing their job and actually following the rules?
It's the same as it was, I think, last time you asked me that question, Jane, which is I expect all ministers to be focused on making sure that they are doing the best job possible for New Zealanders.
The Prime Minister was then quizzed about whether he'd need to call an early election should he lose any more ministers.
I think that's somewhat unfair question. We've had some allegations raised against a minister that are largely based on speculation, and that clearly hasn't changed anything in terms of the stability of the government.
You've got 19 ministers in cabinet now. If you lost another, you'd have lost 10% of your whole cabinet.
That's a hypothetical question.
Well, it's not a hypothetical question because you're losing ministers at a rate of like 1 every 7 weeks.
Well, it is a hypothetical question because it hasn't happened.
Te Piramia Chris Hipkins there. To Australia now, where there's been a finding of serious corrupt conduct against former New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian. The finding comes from the state's independent corruption watchdog known as ICAC. It also found that the Premier's former boyfriend, Daryl Maguire, acted corruptly and recommended charges be considered against him. There was no recommendation of charges against the former Premier. The ABC's Nick Grimm has this report.
It's the culmination of a remarkable fall from political grace for the former Premier of New South Wales. But she was riding high in the polls and credited by many for guiding the state and for the rest of the country, for that matter, through the worst of the COVID pandemic when she became a subject of this investigation and resigned from the state's top job. So not only is today's corruption finding damning in its own right, it also entwines her inextricably with the corrupt conduct of her former boyfriend, Daryl Maguire, a man who himself himself resigned in disgrace from the New South Wales Parliament 5 years ago. This inquiry has also produced a corruption finding against the former member for Wagga Wagga, concluding he improperly used his position as an MP to advance his own financial interests and the financial interests of close associates. Gladys Berejiklian, meanwhile, has been found to have engaged in serious corruption by breaching public trust for failing to declare her close personal relationship with Daryl Maguire and refusing to discharge her duty as a parliamentarian to report corruption. She had a conflict of interest that the ICAC has found could objectively have the potential to influence the performance of a public duty. The ICAC found she engaged in grave misconduct as Premier. And in terms of any further legal proceedings, the ICAC will ask the state's Director of Public Prosecutions to consider whether Daryl Maguire and two of his private business associates should be prosecuted. But significantly, it says in its report, and I quote, "It is not of the opinion that consideration should be given to obtaining the advice of the DPP with respect to the prosecution of Ms Berejiklian for any offence." But of course that won't do anything to remove the taint of corruption that has now been put on her. Well, even before Gladys Berejiklian was called to give evidence to the ICAC and resigned as Premier, the ICAC's interest into the affairs of Daryl Maguire started years earlier when it began investigating property deals involving one of Sydney's local councils, Canterbury. And it set up this inquiry called Operation Keppel. It was during that inquiry that Gladys Berejiklian revealed that she had had a secret 5-year romantic relationship with Mr Maguire, an admission that left even many of her closest political supporters utterly gobsmacked, it's safe to say. The ICAC has found her behaviour amounted to serious corrupt conduct.
Late this afternoon, the former Premier released a statement saying serving the people of New South Wales was an honour and a privilege. At all times, I have worked my hardest in the public interest. Nothing in this report demonstrates otherwise. Thank you to the members of the public for their incredible support. This will sustain me always. The report is currently being examined by my legal team. Ukraine is making another plea for quick admission into the NATO military alliance and hoping to get some answers next month. The bid is backed by its Eastern European neighbours who are uneasy that a Russian mercenary is in exile in Belarus. The ABC's Isabella Higgins reports.
The leaders of Poland and Lithuania made a surprise visit to Kyiv to see their Ukrainian counterpart. Volodymyr Zelensky greeted both with a warm embrace before they started talks at the presidential palace. Poland's Andrzej Duda says the security situation in the region has changed once again, with Russia's Yevgeny Prigozhin exiled to Belarus posing a new threat.
We cannot exclude that the Wagner Group's presence in Belarus can be a potential danger for Poland, for Lithuania and potentially Latvia, that is also a neighbour of Belarus.
Ukraine is again pushing to join NATO, the US-led military alliance. They've been promised membership, but now they want a clear pathway outlined at the next NATO summit in July.
We understand that while the war is ongoing, we can't become a member of NATO. However, we need to be sure that after the war, we will become a member. That's the signal we want to get.
Russia has blamed NATO's eastern expansion for one of the reasons for its invasion of Ukraine. Estonia's Prime Minister Kaja Kallas says Ukraine must be given answers.
The only thing that can end the cycle of aggressions against its neighbours is NATO membership. Hence, for peace, we need Ukraine in NATO. In Bucharest summit, allies agreed that Ukraine would become a member. This should not remain a hollow promise.
The US says it's still closely monitoring the situation in Russia following the attempted mutiny by Wagner forces at the weekend. President Joe Biden told reporters Moscow is losing its war, but made a verbal slip-up and said the war in Iraq instead of Ukraine.
It's hard to tell, but he's clearly losing the war in Iraq. He's losing the war at home, and he is become a bit of a flyer around the world.
The US's top diplomat, Antony Blinken, says it's still hard to know if the uprising has impacted President Vladimir Putin's grip on power.
I don't want to predict where this is going to go, when it's going to get there. I do know that Putin has a lot of new questions that he has to answer for. This is a moving picture, and I don't think we've seen the last act.
Thanks to a new law, South Koreans should have an easier time figuring out how old they are, and many just became a year or two younger. The new law aligns the nation's two traditional age counting methods. Who knew? With international standards. CNN's Paula Hancock explains.
Asking someone in South Korea how old they are is a far more complicated question than you might think. You may well get three different answers. First of all, there is Korean age, where you're considered a year old on the day you're born, and you become a year older every January 1st. Second, the calendar age. You take the current year, 2023, minus your birth year, and that is your age. Third, international age, the system most countries use around the world where you start at 0 and you become a year older on your birthday. Now, South Korea has been using a mixture of all three systems for decades. That all changes today, making international age the standard. Most people woke up this morning 1 or even 2 years younger.
I don't feel like my age changed overnight, but talking to my friends, we all felt good about getting younger.
On the one hand, I feel good about being younger, and on the other hand, I'm wondering if this will make things more complicated on paper.
This change is to avoid the, quote, unnecessary social and economic costs. President Yoon Suk-yeol has been pushing for this change, and surveys show that the majority of Koreans actually agree that there should be a standardisation of age counting. There are some exceptions, though. For example, going into elementary school, military conscription will still keep to the traditional system.
So the change is symbolic because the things that matter to people, like when you can vote, when you can buy alcohol, when you can buy cigarettes, when you can watch, N17 movies, etc., they actually remain exactly the same.
It's a change that has been talked about for years, and it is a change that could well confuse for years to come.
Still confused. 17 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A gang that kidnapped an Australian professor in Papua New Guinea appears to have struck again, this time snatching and assaulting a group of girls and women. There are calls for police and the government to do more to catch them. The ABC's Tim Swanston reports, and a warning, you may find some details distressing.
It was just after nightfall earlier this month when a gang of armed men started entering homes in the remote southern highlands village of Wallagu, kidnapping women. One of the victims, who we'll call Jane, says she was led to a church where about a dozen others were being held, including girls as young as 12 and a mother with a newborn child.
They took us to a house and held us there for 1 to 2 hours. Around 11, they took us into the jungles. They gave us their bags to carry. They belted us and did all sorts of things.
Jane says the men raped them and kept them in the jungle overnight. The next morning, the elders from the village caught up with the kidnappers.
The elders said, "We will pay you some money and pigs. Let our girls go." But the men said no, and they negotiated until the elders went back.
It was several days before the ransom was paid and the kidnappers left. The women and girls were taken to another village for medical checks.
I am afraid of going back home. Physically, I am here, but my mind is floating elsewhere. I am afraid to go back to the village.
Multiple sources have told the ABC this gang is the same group that took Australian Professor Bryce Barker and 3 PNG women he was working with hostage from a village near Wallagu. A ransom was paid for their release. A provincial governor has been quoted in local newspapers as saying he believes the failure to capture the gang is only encouraging it. Chairwoman of Advancing PNG Women Leaders Network and advocate Ruth Kisam wants a major law and order response.
And now we're facing this terrorism right at our doorstep, where women and girls are being raped and rape is being weaponized. Park everything aside. The government should now concentrate on law and order for the next 6 months or the next year.
However, Prime Minister James Marape admits there are few police stationed in the area.
In that part of our country, there have been little presence of permanent police. For instance, Como Station's got only 2 policemen.
But more women from the region are starting to speak out, with one woman who wants to remain anonymous to protect her safety telling the ABC that police have to send more officers.
All got big, loud guns. The criminals are armed with powerful guns. They are huge and muscular men who have guns like AK-47, M16 rifles, shotguns, all sorts of weapons. So how will we defend ourselves? The husbands are helpless.
The government says extra police have been flown into the region to try to catch the gang.
In Australia, some customers appear to be eating at home and staying away from cafes and restaurants as high interest rates smash household budgets. In South Australia's regional town of Naracoorte, those financial pressures are combining with cold winter weather to put hospitality businesses under even more pressure. The ABC's Eugene Boivier has the story.
Ange Laurie always dreamed of opening her own cafe. And in March last year, she and her husband Steve did just that. But not long after, interest rates started to rise.
We had a pretty good start. I had a few staff members on here and we had to slowly cut back, a little bit more. And then from Christmas this year, it's just been really, really, really quiet.
Steve and Ange's cafe is closing on Friday. Business has dried up, something Ange Laurie puts down to customers focusing on their mortgages instead of getting hot chips and milkshakes.
People are concentrating, they've got to pay their house payments first, they've got other things they need to pay, the rise in fruit and veggies, you've got to feed your kids and it's cheaper to buy from the supermarket and cook your own food. We've had quite a few customers who are very upset about us closing. They said that, oh, we've been there, we've tried to support you, but unfortunately with costs and stock prices and things like that, it's just unmanageable anymore.
Interest rates have risen 12 times in just over a year. The industry is represented by Restaurant and Catering Australia, and Chief Executive Suresh Manikam says it's the same situation all over the country.
The cost of interest rates or the interest rate hikes that we've seen is a factor to all businesses. None of us are immune to that.
Mr Manikam is urging people to get out and about and stay loyal to their favourite eateries.
Get down to your local restaurant, have a nice hearty soup or a nice winter warmer. And, you know, everybody will feel good about that. So we'd encourage people to get out there and you know, make do with the best that the restaurants and cafes have to offer.
Customer Jefferson Najuthi says it's not an easy thing to do when you're trying to make ends meet.
You know, you have to save what you have and try and survive on it. Because wages haven't gone up, but the cost of living has gone up. So, yeah, dining out less often than we used to a year or 2 years ago.
The Reserve Bank will make its next decision on interest rates on the 3rd of July.
Concerns about artificial intelligence tend to be in the realm of sci-fi, but a much more real and menacing use of the technology has been uncovered. Pedophiles are using artificial intelligence and virtual reality technology to create and market child sex abuse material. A BBC investigation found the illegal content is marketed using accounts on mainstream platforms. The BBC's Angus Crawford reports, and a warning, some listeners may find the following report distressing.
So I'm in a room with a woman called Tara. Tara is just an avatar created for use in VR pornography. So there's a dance pose. Tara is fully clothed, but make no mistake, most of the content is extremely explicit. Scroll through.
A lot of work has been done on genitalia.
Fabien Benetou is a VR expert, an advisor on tech to the European Parliament, and shows us how it works. The game's called Vertimate. It lets users build their own VR porn, anything they can imagine.
So what I would worry for is for people to use this illegally.
Too late, it's already happening. Even though Vertimate says it's put in place stringent measures and strongly opposes illegal use, we found players creating child models for use in explicit sex scenes. But VR is just one of the new technologies driving the growth in computer-generated child sexual abuse material. Artificial intelligence is also having a huge impact. AI allows paedophiles to create any image they want, almost indistinguishable from the real thing. They're using the AI image generator Stable Diffusion, describing what they want, the program doing the rest.
There has been this huge flood.
Octavia has spent months researching this world, groups of paedophiles on mainstream platforms making, sharing, selling AI-generated illegal images.
The volume is just huge, so people will say, oh, we'll aim to do at least 1,000 images a month.
Well, and they've got thousands of followers, some of these people.
But then it does get
We didn't pay to subscribe, and we didn't view any illegal images, but we could see the comments and hashtags.
Don't be shy to let me know. It's not just very young girls, it's often, talking about toddlers and using babies as sex toys and just the most awful stuff.
It's really shocking. Police fear a flood of AI images could make it harder to find real victims of abuse and want big tech to take action now.
I think it is outrageous that companies are creating huge profits yet aren't taking the moral responsibility.
Are we at a tipping point then?
I think we are. I think we are.
And the cost of not getting this right?
Well, the cost is a human cost.
Stability AI, the company that helped create the tech that makes this possible, told us they strictly prohibit any misuse for illegal or immoral purposes across our platforms. And they strongly support law enforcement efforts against those who misuse our products.
The British government's climate watchdog has released a scathing report saying the country is no longer a leader in the fight against global warming. New coal, oil and airport expansion plans mean confidence that the UK will meet its goal of net zero by 2050 has plummeted. The BBC's climate editor Justin Rowlett reports.
What the report's saying is, look, you talk the talk on climate, but you're not walking the walk. What does that mean? Well, it's all about delivery, and it says delivery of its climate ambitions are worryingly slow. The ambitions, it says, are stretching. What they're talking about is a commitment made by Boris Johnson in the run-up to the big UN climate conference we had in Glasgow back in 2021. He said the UK would cut its emissions by 68% on 1990 levels by the end of this decade. So we've got 7 years to get there. And that is, a very ambitious target. But that said, it's a legally binding target. And the job of the Climate Change Committee, the official watchdog for the UK government on climate, is to judge whether or not it's going to make that target. It got a huge release of additional information as a result of a court case, and it says that information has made it less confident rather than more confident about the UK's ambition. So what kind of things are we talking about? Well, the decision to approve a coal mine, the expectation it's going to approve a new oil field off the coast of Shetland, then the speed, the pace of the rollout of renewables into the future. We've been quite good in the past, but not fast enough in the future. It's also saying we're not doing enough to decarbonise industry. And that's not all. It's also saying, look, you need to do more to manage how people in Britain cut their carbon emissions. You need to encourage them to do the right thing. Have a listen to what the chairman of the Climate Change Committee, Lord Deben, had to say to me when I spoke to him last week.
Well, the sad thing is that the government, having really led the world in net zero, in the policies that it's put forward, in the very important success of the Glasgow meeting, has now lost that leadership because it isn't delivering. And that's the issue. It's to deliver what it has committed.
And that was Lord Deben, who's the chairman of the UK Climate Change Committee. Before we head off, a little bit of your feedback. Jean has got in touch. She's grateful for the breakdown from the Red Cross about the $25+ million donated by New Zealanders after the cyclone. 12 million of that has now been handed out to various community groups. And they're launching a new bundle, they say, to help uninsured families replace furniture and whiteware and other essentials in their properties. Jean says she was one of the ones that donated, I think, and has been asking where the money's gone. Now, someone else, a listener, very intelligent listener indeed, has got in touch to say that Giles should be given his own show. We've just been wondering, just Giles maybe? Beckford reckons. Breakfast with Beckford, Giles Styles. And we reckon, well, he's a boomer, so Boomer Beckford. And we've got a Zoomer in our control room, Ben. Lovely Ben, our audio tech. There's Ben. Hi, Ben, if you're watching. What about the Zoomer and the Boomer? Ben and Giles together be an absolute cracker. I'd tune in for that one. Anyway, we'll float that idea with management and get back to you. The late news team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. If you missed anything on Checkpoint, you can watch us hear us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi popo. Tomorrow from 5 a.m, First Up's counting down the days with a super fan who can barely contain her excitement over the FIFA Women's World Cup.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. I'm Todd Zahner. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says a finding that the Education Minister misled Parliament is regrettable. The Privileges Committee says Jan Tinetti took too long to correct an inaccurate statement on school attendance figures. She's apologised. Cyclone hit Hawke's Bay growers can now get concessionary loans to help get back on their feet, but some businesses say the government's taken far too long to come up with help. Fiji's Home Affairs Minister and police are investigating a leaked document calling for the military to take over the country, and about 2,000 people